Beers with Chad.
Hey everybody, what's up? Chad Wesley Smith here, Beers with Chad. Again, I'm filming in the morning. You can still hear my voice is still on. I'm still trying to get healthy. So this morning I've got from one of my good buddies, Dean Tompkins, who we just recorded an episode with yesterday that'll be out next week. Thunder King cold brew coffee, black gold, right here local in Costa Mesa, California. Probably been drinking this stuff for maybe almost the entirety of the time that Dean's had the company, about 3 years. So it was fun to sit down with him yesterday and talk about entrepreneurship, branding, and just kind of shoot the shit with Dean. So cheers. That's good, but that is strong. If I have 2 Thunder Kings in a morning, I'm flying pretty high. So this morning I was driving to jiu-jitsu and saw a notification for one of my favorite podcasts come up, 30 for 30 podcasts, which have a ton of great ones that you should check out. The Trials of Dan and Dave about Dave Johnson, Dan O'Brien, Reebok ads, all that stuff is a really good one. Birth of the UFC one is great. Their season on Bikram Chowdhury and Bikram Yoga, very, very interesting. A lot of good stuff. The one that this morning was a 30 for 30 plus about Seau, which is going to be an upcoming 30 for 30 documentary, which I love all those. I can make another episode if you'd like, just talking about my top 10, 20, whatever 30 for 30s. I think I've probably seen I think that there's close to 100 now. I've probably seen 85 of them, and of those 85, I've seen many of those more times than I'd like to admit. So you talk about my favorites and all that kind of stuff. But this morning they talked about Seau, which I think is yet to be released, but is either maybe just came out this week or is about to come out. And it was interesting listening to it this morning because it really struck me. Junior Seau playing for the San Diego Chargers. I grew up in Southern California. My junior All-American football team, the whole city of Irvine, where I grew up, is the Irvine Chargers. And when I started playing football, I was 9 years old, and that number 55 on that first football team I played on the Irvine Chargers, was a very coveted number, and that was all because of Junior Seau, who was just such a beloved guy in the whole NFL community, but I think particularly in Southern California. You grow up playing high school football for me with Samoan guys, and Junior Seau was like the pinnacle, sort of that hero for all these Samoan football players growing up in Southern California and all across the country. So in it they talk about, this is a short episode, 25 minutes maybe. They kind of interview the director and talk a little bit about CTE and Junior Seau's on-field and off-field persona as this very friendly guy to these sort of dark times he had in his life and as a father and everything. And it was interesting because CTE is something I've been interested in since that first League of Denial PBS Frontline came out probably 5 years ago now, which is definitely worth the watch. It is really what the movie Concussion is based on, and I think that the documentary version, the Frontline version, is much more interesting even than the movie, though the movie does put some powerful images along with some of the stories from League of Denial. And when that came out, a couple weeks or a few months after it came out, I was in Oakland having dinner with my friend Miles Burris, who was on the episode a couple weeks ago, and he was playing linebacker for the Raiders at that point. I remember asking him, have you seen this movie, this League of Denial? And he's like, I haven't seen it. The guys in the locker room, some guys have been talking about it, and I started to tell him about it because it was just a very fascinating topic to me, and I get one sentence in to tell him about the movie and CTE and all this this scary shit, really, and he just stops me. He's like, man, I'm not going to retire, so don't even tell me about it. And it's interesting, that attitude. A lot of these quotes you hear from Junior Seau in this 30 for 30 episode, and I'm looking forward to watching the full documentary version, as he talks, as he says things like, humans are not meant to, run around full speed, hit each other in the head, come back to the huddle and say, all right, we're going to do that 60 more times. And he talked about, basically having a headache since he was 15 years old. And yeah, just as a football fan, I've always been a football fan my whole life. And you see this stuff of people talking about banning youth football and these NFL rule changes. And it's just an interesting thing to see people, in my life, people I know who are concerned about themselves, having CTE issues, having memory loss, guys who played college football, people that you all would know and recognize, as part of the Juggernaut community, people who are concerned about that kind of stuff for themselves. And I don't have any kids, but it does make me think, like, is that something that's worth doing? The performance coach in me thinks about it differently than the concerned citizen kind of side of things does. That I think kids could and probably would be very well served to just play flag football up until high school. That they would be able to develop so much of the movement skills and all that kind of stuff, and then add in the contact later as they go. And as this stuff gets legislated and everything by people in Washington, or I know here in California, there's been a bill go to the state House of Representatives in California to ban youth tackle football. That got shut down, but I think it's coming back up. It's an interesting thing to as you look at the NFL rule changes. So much of the stuff is, all right, you can't lower your helmet to tackle a guy, or even now the running back can't lower his helmet in a defender, and this defenseless wide receiver, and all the rules to protect the quarterback. But I don't really see a lot of those rules being effective. If you look at the League of Denial movie, Mike Webster, the seminal case of CTE discovered by Dr. Bennett Amalu, he's a center. The next guy, also an offensive lineman. It's offensive and defensive linemen. Yes, linebackers, running backs. Can quarterbacks get it? For sure. Can wide receivers get it? For sure. But it's not so much the Steve Youngs and Troy Aikmans of the world, guys who are on TV, who seem to be doing very well for themselves, both who had to retire because of having so many concussions, that they had 10 concussions in their career, or in their NFL career, and maybe 5 more in college, and one 3 to 5 more in college, and 1 to 3 more in high school. Like, that's a lot of concussions. But let's say that's 8, maybe they had 18 concussions in their life, which that's the absolute high end of things. But beyond that, how many more big hits did they take compared to this offensive and defensive linemen, linebackers and running backs, tight ends, who every single play, head to head, what they would refer to in League of Denial as a subconcussive event. And I think that's where the NFL is going to run into problems, or they're making an effort in trying to change the rules to protect these guys and educate the guys, even though maybe sometimes they don't want to be educated about it, and that's fine. They're adults, and that's their choice to make hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and it's going to come at a risk. As long as they're being educated about it, or having the opportunity to be educated about it, that's fine. But if the NFL really wanted to make a significant change in the brain health of their players, how would they write a rule that says offensive and defensive linemen, you guys can't hit heads? Because there's just no way to there's no way the rule could be created, and there's no way after that it could be enforced. And as you look at the sport of rugby, I remember when I was in Australia a few years ago, and his name escapes me. I want to say Jonah Takalua, but I know that that's not it, because that's Summer Heights High. But this all-time great player for the All Blacks passed away, and he's younger, and it got me to asking the Australian guys, are concussions a big thing? Maybe this guy died something related to CTE, and they said, maybe in a weekend of rugby games, there's a concussion. And obviously rugby players aren't wearing helmets, and they're not hitting heads because they don't have the protection of the helmet to feel a little bit more brave in leading with their head. It's kind of like the argument that you hear Joe Rogan make about UFC fighters, MMA fighters wearing gloves. That wearing gloves is actually more dangerous for the opponent than it is than being bare knuckled would be, because it allows the puncher to punch harder, with his wrist taped and his knuckles covered, than if he didn't have that protection. He wouldn't be able to put quite as much on it, and the guy getting hit wouldn't receive quite as much impact. It may be from a harder surface, but not as high a velocity. So you kind of look at rugby. If you were to take helmets away from everyone and then play football, the game would change for sure, but I think you would actually have, huge sweeping changes to the technique of offensive and defensive line play when they weren't going to use their head as a weapon anymore. And there would be some guys who would still smash their head in there, without a helmet on, go head to head. And those are probably the same guys who, when you tell them everything about CTE, are okay with it happening. But the thing that really compelled me this morning after listening to this episode a couple hours ago was, I coached high school football for 3 years, from when I was 19 to 22 before I started Juggernaut. And we had a kid who was a great player who was in my position group, defensive line, but he always had a lot of problems. A kid named Cyrus. Sorry. Cyrus probably got 5 concussions playing high school football. And we thought maybe he was bipolar. He had troubles at home, troubles in school, all this stuff, getting fights, everything. About 3 years after, about 3 years after I graduated high school, so about a year and a half into running Juggernaut for me, Cyrus died. Died of a heroin overdose. And as I was listening this morning, to the Seau episode, it had never crossed my mind before that Cyrus might have had CTE. And I was listening, and it just struck me. I was like, he must have had it. Because you hear about, the college kid from Penn that had this big concussion, committed suicide, that even younger, youth, high school players have passed away very early and been diagnosed with it. And it just struck me that, this kid who I'd spent all this time with and coached and everything, and he would get hurt, and we'd push him back to play. it was the first time that I really thought about, like, he probably had that. That's probably a big reason why this 20-year-old kid was having the problems that he did. So I guess with that, I would just say, if you're a football coach, a parent, a player, you can get knee replacements, you can get new shoulders, new hips. You only got one brain. Be very, very thoughtful about what you're doing with it. Looking forward to watching that full Seau episode. Hopefully this will be one. Hopefully this will be one of the only times I cry on here. Yeah. That's it. That's my thoughts on CTE. Hopefully the guys keep getting educated about it. NFL can keep making rules, because it's tough. It's a real thing for sure. So thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And see you next time.